talking about winter part 2, because I allowed myself a little bit to get distracted and go off at a tangent. One of the things I've been giving some thought towards is, in the modern age, we can still be affected deeply by a harsh winter. That depends on where you're living. And I'm not sort of necessarily saying if you're in an affluent area. It's more sort of if you're in the countryside or which country you're in. I'd say for, I don't know, modern suburban life, winter is, uncomfortable, but it's not ever going to be as harsh as it was, say, from the medieval age back into the depths of history, including the Viking Age and the pre-Viking Age and that. And that is going to alter our perception on how we treat winter. Yes, you're more likely to spend time indoors. We're still going out to work. We're not sort of, holed up in the homestead waiting for the dark nights to end, hoping we've harvested enough food and that no one's going to die. And that can seem pretty bleak, but you've got to take into account there are rituals such as, you close your doors and perform rituals. It becomes a very private time historically, because you're essentially battening down the hatches to see out winter. It's difficult not to imagine that this then becomes a time when a family is locked in one location and they spend more time with each other than they do throughout the rest of the year. Now, there's some casual, like, sort of wink wink sort of comment you can make about, say, a husband and wife, ain't got a lot to do, so, shenanigans happen. And there's probably some fairness in sort of saying that's probably when a lot of children are conceived. So when we fast forward 1 year to the next winter, allowing for the sort of pregnancy cycle, husband and wife now have a very small baby, or a few months old, possibly. And winter becomes a lot more of a struggle or a challenge. You're not just looking after yourself, probably looking after your livestock, hoping that you've got enough food, firewood and that to keep everyone alive until those days come when, the sun shines for longer periods of time. You see buds, you see the land starting to awaken again. And that leads us to sort of, I guess, really what I wanted to get at is perceptions of the gods and how sort of we would have looked at Odin and the Wild Hunt and things like that. And if you have a young family, or even if you had your elders with you, it's just that sort of, I can probably sort of say I would now be considered an elder in that time. I don't know, I'm mature. Sometimes I'm immature. The point is, winter is a test. It's an endurance test. Challenges a family unit when you're most frail are at the most vulnerable. The wild hunt, death, comes for the weak or the vulnerable. It leads you to thinking, sort of, obviously, Odin hunting with his wolves, riding Sleipnir, which is associated with the transition from life to death. Gaudy and Freki, sort of hunger and greed, I think it is. You are holed up in your homestead, wondering if the hunt will come your way. I've seen this possible sort of concern or respect, I should say. Respect is the right word. When the last winter solstice, we gathered with some friends and met a few new people. And our host had gone to pick up a couple of other friends. They returned to the house, and they were blowing their horns. And the person we was meeting for the first time, she was alarmed, shall we say, that the guys were casually blowing their horns at the winter solstice, calling the wild hunt, and that's not a good idea. And it's taken some time to sort of, I suppose, really focus on or give some thought towards why that is. And obviously for this person who's it means a lot more to, has grown up with it more so than certainly I have. The thought of drawing the attention of the wild hunt is not a good thing, because you're challenging, really death to come and claim someone. But you don't really want to do, especially if you're in the company of friends, you don't want that to happen. It might be sort of a cycle of life and death. It is a part of nature. However, if you try to think of that family unit locked in their home for the winter stretch, it's easy to imagine if you've got vulnerable family members, you don't want the attention of the wild hunt. Let them go elsewhere. I think that's fair enough. Also, as we are wont to do, you might think sort of like, well, if they do come in this direction, how can we placate them, ask them to overlook us and to go on their way? Again, it leads you to think, well, it's said Odin only drinks. He gives meat or food to Geri and Freki. And obviously there are some certain things that you tie the wild hunt into it and Yule, and we've got what I consider really a sort of Norse practicality on what winter represents and this time to celebrate death and life. And obviously you have these offerings for the All-Father. Make of that what you will, because obviously we've got, for paganism really, not just Norse but paganism, a practical approach to sort of, if you draw the attention, here are our offerings, a drink and some food. Please be on your way, leave us with our gifts of life. I mean, that's a way of looking at it. I'm not saying this is actually it. I mean, it's stuff I still want to research more. I've heard ideas, and we all have to do our own homework or create what works for us in a way that, seems plausible. So let's just edge forward to sort of folk tradition and probably, in all fairness, the influence of Christianity and wanting to sort of keep some traditions but sort of step away from the old gods. It's easy to see the Yule Father, as jokingly like to call Odin, becoming sort of, let's say, the modern day sort of Santa Claus, Father Christmas, whichever you want to call him. And the focus on children, vulnerable, being, rather than wolves, it's reindeer. A jolly fat man with his reindeer comes to bring presents. Have you been good or bad? Have you been good? Have you been bad? And obviously what has continued is sort of the offerings of drink and food and the hope for presents and hopefully not getting lumps of coal. And just sort of seeing they aren't necessarily connected. There is some correlation and some different ways of looking at sort of a pagan's practicality of death. Death's coming. It's a hunt. Do you die or do you live? And a more softer or perhaps even a more positive approach, which is just that sort of, well, let's be thankful for what we have. We have these gifts, and the gifts come to us from the jolly fat man. It's interesting that if you have, say, a man and a wife having this time together, passing the dark nights that come past, that as we reach spring, if there's been no death, hopefully, or whatever, it's come spring, as the land is awaking and we see these buds appearing, you would think sort of maybe the wife then starts to show that she is with child, that she is pregnant. Again, that brings us towards a spring cycle and towards summer and childbirth and just everything going around. It's just things that have been rotated in my head and wanted to sort of work through, really, that why I feel spring is important, and I'm happy to be celebrating it, and because we do then see that hunt is moving away or retiring for the season, and new life is starting to ebb through until we get through summer and autumn for the next cycle of the hunt to come and have its harvest or not. And that's really some of the things I wanted to I veered away from in some parts in part 1 of this video, but really wanted to cover more in depth in a ramble as a part 2 of the video. It's I don't know. It's in our nature to make sense of things we don't understand. Looking back to this winter that is now sort of coming to an end, the last few weeks we've had that last hurrah of snow, and just prior to that, again, something to make sense of or not, is the fact that the Northern Lights were meant to have been able, even here in the UK, people were able to see it. And that seems to me like that is a portent of something. Whether good or bad, I don't know. I've said on a few occasions over the past year, I'd love to see the Northern Lights, and sort of joked about sort of if we go to convinced my friend to take his partner to go with us to Iceland to see them. And yet, just let's say a few weeks ago, they reportedly you could see them from the UK. I looked, I couldn't. I know a stab in the eye to me. Perhaps that from Kent it was just too cloudy, or I looked a couple of times but just couldn't see them, which is disappointing. I have no problem seeing the moon. The moon shines handsomely through our lounge window on a regular basis. No northern lights though. However, perhaps that's because I need to follow my desire and go to Iceland or something to see them for myself in a far richer way. Maybe. There's always that sort of, you build in your mind an image, an emotion, a moment, and that doesn't necessarily always translate to what you actually experience when you get to do it. It's a bucket list thing, kind of, and I do need to stop talking about it and make it happen. I look forward to this weekend to celebrate the return of spring. The mead's already at home, been ordered, and is there, ready to take to our camping site. I'm looking forward to ritual. I'm looking forward to going to Coldroom Longbarrow and participating alongside the druids there that will be sort of performing their ritual there that has an open invite. It's very much a new year, a new cycle of life that I'm keen to sort of grab with both hands and see sort of what lays ahead this year. Until winter comes, which it must do. We know it happens, it's inevitable. Like death is, for all of us, death is inevitable. And we can take a practical approach to it, like the Norse perhaps did, or do, or we can try and dodge it. That's a decision we all have to make for ourselves. Thank you very much for listening. Sorry that had to be in 2 parts, but I needed to refocus, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.